time we usually have a little bit of Dharma talk, so I usually just talk about some of the Buddha's teachings which can help us to train our mind and to understand how we should practice our meditation. So this is a training. The Buddha did teach a training, and he suggested that we should start off with an intention, a right intention, a right thought. I'll explore this in the course of the next few days. One of those right intentions is this practice of renunciation. Renunciation. Voluntarily giving up something that's usually considered delightful, something that is a pleasure of the senses. And so this is what you have done by coming here on retreat. You have voluntarily decided to give up all the pleasures of the world outside, the pizza, the Netflix, I don't know, what else would you be doing? Puzzles, jigsaw puzzles, and other assorted delights. Voluntarily, you've decided to let go of those things just for a short time to focus on your spiritual practice, which is wonderful. Sadhu, 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 as we say. And this is a beautiful intention, this intention of renunciation. This is one way that we can practice this letting go. Maybe another word for renunciation is letting go. And you come here to a place like this, a place of spiritual practice, and your renunciation will be tested a little. Oh, if only I was in my own bed. If only I had my big, beautiful bathroom and my fluffy towels. If only there was the aircon in my room. And so here on retreat, we get to see the limits of our renunciation and test ourselves a little bit. And you'll find that even though things are pretty rustic here, pretty basic, they're good enough for spiritual practice. They're good enough to meditate with, to sleep with, to eat with. All of the conditions here are good enough. They're good enough to help you practice meditation. And they're good enough in that actually they're probably better than the conditions many people in the world would live in. They might not be the same standard in your own homes. However, here you learn to see that your happiness, your well-being, is not dependent upon all those things that you might think your happiness and wellness depends upon. Here you'll see, actually, I can survive with really basic things. So this is why this practice of renunciation is so good for us to do, because it really hits back at some of the tendencies we have in our mind that attract us to the pleasures of the senses. So usually in the world outside, we're bombarded with advertisements, with products, with all sorts of exciting things, all day, every day. And in our own lives, we're constantly reaching out for new and exciting things, pleasures of the senses. And so a little story about another monkey. And just a like content warning, it's not a happy story. I was going to say it's a bedtime story, but I'm like, what kind of bedtime story is this? Oh well, you know how morbid the Buddhists are. So, story about a monkey. And this is from the suttas, this is the Makkata Sutta. So the Buddha tells this story about this little monkey, and he says, you know, in the forest, there are various territories, various domains. So there are some monkeys that live deep in the forest, far away from humans. And there are other monkeys that live in that zone that's kind of like in between the forest and the village. And so he said the humans have their zone too. And sometimes the humans will go to the forest to hunt monkeys. So before, you know, you heard me say, oh, you know, can you be safe from hunters? And that might have seemed a bit of a random thing for a monk to say, but now it's starting to make sense, isn't it? Yes. So those hunters go into that zone where the humans and the monkeys interact. And there they set what is known as a tar trap. Do you know what a tar trap is? They still use them today, actually, in parts of India. They're sometimes they're little pots with maybe like a sweet treat, perhaps a banana inside, something delicious. And the monkey comes along, puts its hand inside, and because that tar is so sticky, gets stuck. So this story is about a monkey who did just that. Comes along, sees the treat, puts its hand in to the tar trap, and what happens? He gets stuck. And so, thinking to escape, takes his other paw, puts it in the tar trap too, thinking I'll push myself away. And what happens? It's stuck. And so he takes his foot and thinking I'll push myself away, he pushes, and that foot too gets stuck. And the other one too. Finally, he thinks, I'll use my snout to push myself free. And of course, the poor monkey is now stuck at 5 points. And so the Buddha says, this is like our 5 senses. Our sight, our hearing, our smell, taste, touch. These are the 5 points where we can get trapped. And the Buddha says, once you're trapped, then you belong to the hunter. The hunter just comes along, picks you up, and does whatever they want with you. And the Buddha says, what else can the monkey do but lie there, screeching and sad? And so for us too, this is what we see in our own lives. We see the things that we are reaching out to often are these pleasures of the senses. And we reach out for them because this is where, in the past, we think we've found some happiness. And perhaps we have. But what kind of happiness? What kind of duration is that happiness? And where does that happiness lead? So the Buddha was always cautioning us against indulging in sensory pleasures, the pleasures of the senses. He saw that there were so many limitations to them. And most importantly, it was the pleasures of the senses that keep us from continuing along the spiritual path. Think about in your own lives, those times where you thought, oh, I really should meditate. And you think, but first a cup of tea. Or, oh, I really should meditate, but why don't I clean the house and listen to some music? You know, I think I should meditate, or I should go to that Dharma talk. People are now doing this to me, writing a message saying, I was going to come to your talk, but I got a dinner invitation instead. So off they go to dinner. So this is the kind of attraction that these senses, these sensory objects, sensory desires have over us. They kind of control our mind in that our mind is always reaching out and grabbing onto them. And so we reach out and we grab on and we get stuck on them. And we see this in our meditation practice. Once we've finally gotten over some of those tendencies towards sensory pleasures that prevent us from sitting, when we finally get over that and manage to sit down, then the mind says, maybe a cup of tea now, or perhaps a bit of chocolate cake, or why don't I just go and lie down and meditate for a little while. So there's this tendency all the time before we sit, and then when we sit, we see the mind always reaching out, wanting to grab on to a sensory object. And so this is something that we experience in meditation. Sometimes it could be the sounds coming in. We're like, oh, I really want to listen to those birds. Sometimes it can be the experience of the body perhaps getting too hot and you think, oh, I really should go and be somewhere cooler. We see this tendency towards satisfying our sensual pleasures, attempting to satisfy ourselves, but never really becoming satisfied by them. Which is why the Buddha said that renunciation, this right intention of letting go of these sensory pleasures, why this was a good intention to have. Because by practicing in this way, we're combating that very strong tendency towards agitation, moving away from peace and stillness and contentment. When we have this desire for sensory pleasures, our mind is never still. We're reaching out, we're grabbing onto something and we're holding on tight. So many of my teachers, they teach this image. I think they learned from Ajahn Chah. It's so simple and so effective. I think everyone on YouTube is doing it now, on Instagram too. You see it all the time. They say, you know, you hold this thing, you've reached out, you've grabbed hold of it, you're holding on to it, and it becomes, after some time, really heavy, right? So what do? The answer is very simple. You just put it down. You let go. And then you don't pick it back up. The problem for us, of course, is we often put something down and pick it back up, pick it up, pick it up, pick it up, pick it up over and over and over again. And you see this in your mind, right? You see the way it does this. And so there's this tendency that we need to retrain the mind a little bit with. And part of that is to understand and recognize the drawbacks of these sensual pleasures. It's easy for us to understand the attraction of them, the enjoyment, right? Oh, it's so good to have chocolate cake. It's so wonderful to eat dinner. We see the enjoyment, but we don't see the drawbacks. And so the Buddha, he often taught about these drawbacks so that we could condition our mind by understanding them, so that we weren't so beholden to this tendency this strong desire, this craving. And so the Buddha taught a really beautiful sutta called the Potaliya Sutta, where he talked about some of the drawbacks of sensual pleasures. And in this sutta he compares it to a whole range of things in a series of similes. So the first simile, which I think is the most instructive, is the simile of a dog outside the butcher shop. And the butcher, his job, was he in the sutras, is to take the meat off the bones, right? You take the meat off the bones, you skin the bone, scrape the bone, clean. And so then there's just like a little bit of, tiny little bit of meat and blood on the bone. And only then he throws it away because the bone is worthless to him. And that dog, seeing that bone thrown away, picks up that bone. And the Buddha asks, do you think that that dog will be satisfied? And the answer is no. There's just the flavour, the taste of the meat on that bone. But there's no actual substance. There's no meat. There's nothing for it to help assuage its hunger. And this is how we are also with sensual pleasures, right? We think we get something, we think we'll be satisfied by it, made happy by it, and yet, as the Buddha says, we only reap weariness and disappointment. We're so excited, a new phone. How exciting, how wonderful. And then a few minutes later, the thrill is gone. We think this outfit, this new shirt, this is going to be the one that's going to be me forever. It's going to be my new look. We get it, put it on, meh, whatever. These sensory pleasures don't satisfy us. It's like that bone, that dog with that bone. It gets the flavour, but no nourishment. And the Buddha gives these beautiful similes. He says it's like a birds of prey, like hawks and vultures and falcons, fighting over a tiny scrap of meat. He says this is what it's like. These sensory pleasures cause so many problems in the world. People fighting over these things. In another sutta he talks about how families fight over these things, neighbours fight over these things, countries fight over these things, and sensual pleasures are the cause of conflict in the world and so much suffering. And in the same way we see, we're always competing for things. The price of vegetables has gone through the roof, the price of rent has gone through the roof. You see 60 people queuing up for an apartment viewing. It's like these crows, these hawks and vultures fighting over these scraps. He said it's like a grass torch. Holding this grass torch and the wind is coming to you. It's so easy to get burnt by that torch. And so often we get burnt by our sensual pleasures. You drink too much, you get hungover. You eat too much, you feel sick. You stream too much and your eyes are tired, you feel like you've been to another planet. So you see there's some drawbacks. This is why the Buddha gave these analogies, to help us understand that there's drawbacks. Usually we'll only see the enjoyment. Usually we'll only want to see the enjoyment of those sensory pleasures. But the Buddha asks us to balance out this view so that we start to see the drawbacks, so that we start to understand that these things are incapable of bringing true, ongoing, lasting happiness. these things might entertain us for some short time, but in the end, they're not going to bring us the kind of depth and profundity that we need in our spiritual practice. They're going to distract us from other truths. And so when we practice renunciation, we're actively working against this tendency towards desire. So it's good to do retreat. It's good to let go of those things for a short time. That world outside, you can forget about it while you're here. Hopefully it'll still be there when you go back. But whilst you're here, you can practice that letting go. Not letting your responsibilities to family or to work get in the way of your practice here. Let it go from your mind for a short time. See how working with that frees up some of the mental energy that we can instead transfer to our practice, to developing mindfulness, to seeing more clearly. You can let go of the desire for so many things that you do in your daily life, so many activities. You can let go of them. And for the next few days, just be here, practicing meditation. And you'll see that by letting go of those things, you are able to focus more on your practice. You're able to be here now. And this is what will help you settle into your meditation. When we have a lot of desires for things, when we want a lot of things, when we need a lot of things, the mind is always reaching out like that monkey. We'll be trapped by those things. But when we practice renunciation, letting go, instead, we have freedom from those things. When we reach out, hold on, don't let go, we're suffering. When we practice letting go, not getting involved, we're moving more and more towards freedom. And so this is the process that we see in meditation. When we have the time to practice, we start to see this process unfolding. When we first come to sit, there's a tendency, a natural tendency, a habit that we've formed of wanting, craving, reaching out, grabbing on, holding, not letting go. We form this habit, this tendency towards certain things in our lives. And so when we sit, of course, it's only natural that our mind is going to reach out for those same things. At the beginning, it's only natural, right? There's nothing wrong with it. No one's broken. It's just that we have this very strong tendency that we've formed over time. So you don't just magically come to meditation retreat, sit down in your cushion and whoosh, everything is perfect. Everything is somehow spiritual, somehow more calm or peaceful. No, it's a process. So because we've been engaged in this way of thinking and way of living, our mind will need some time to settle, to become present, to stop engaging in that way of being. And then when we do that, when we give our mind some time to be here, now, to settle, then we can start to retrain the mind. Every time we start to reach out to grab onto something, we practice this letting go, not getting involved. And then we see that actually, over time, we actually see this for ourselves. We understand for ourselves that reaching out, holding on, agitation, distraction, this is actually suffering. But letting go, not getting involved, coming towards stillness, peace, this is happiness. This is freedom. And so we see this for ourselves as that process of meditation unfolds. Which is why I asked those questions of you at the end of last session. How do you feel now? Is it different from when we began? Why? What did you do? Well, you stopped, you sat down, you didn't do anything, didn't get involved. Even just by restraining the body, by sitting, by closing the eyes, by cutting out some of that visual information. Those instructions, let go, don't get involved in the world outside. This helps you move from that agitated, distracted state towards calm and peace. So most of you would have experienced some calm, some peace, some relaxation that comes from letting go. What are we letting go of? The world outside, all of those sensory experiences. And so you start to see this in your own meditation practice, how the mind, when you sit, is of a certain state, certain tendencies, certain habits, and then simply by doing nothing or letting go or understanding the way these thoughts are appearing, you can start to experience more calm, more peace, more stillness. The distractions fade, the energy of the mind increases, and then we start to experience beautiful qualities like joy and bliss, real happiness that we find within ourselves, not the kind of happiness that we find outside, that we need to reach out for through sensory means. And so this is what we're going to be exploring over the next few days. How can we understand for ourselves the process of meditation? How can we retrain ourselves towards this inner happiness? And so for that, we need to stop feeding the monkey the bananas of the world. If we stop feeding that monkey those kinds of bananas, then that monkey will stop coming, will stop swinging around. The monkey will settle down. And then we see that the kind of things that we experience in our meditation are much more beautiful, much more refined than those other things outside. And so this is how we train the monkey. We show it there's better things than bananas. And this is how the monkey will become trained. You'll see it over the course of these next few days, because the training does work. This is a path that many people have practiced before. This is training, a method, a tool that many people have seen for themselves. Many of you have been practicing for a long time, and you know that this works. You know that this is how you get to some peace and stillness in your life. So I want to work with that knowledge that you have and deepen it so that you don't forget it, and so that you can have confidence in your training. And so instead of being like that naughty little monkey reaching out, another image from the suttas to help you, instead of being a monkey with its arms reaching out, getting stuck in the honey, in the tar, the Buddha has a beautiful image of, I guess you'd call it renunciation. And that is the image of a tortoise. Tortoises are very cute. They are very clever too. When a jackal comes and wants to nibble at the tortoise's legs or tail or head, that tortoise retracts its limbs back inside the shell so that it's safe It can't be attacked. So this is like a kind of escape, an escape trick that we can do too whilst we're here. So those 6 limbs, the 4 legs, the head and the tail, the Buddha said this is like our 6 senses. So before I talked about 5 senses, now I'm talking about 6 senses. The last sense, in addition to sight, hearing, smell, taste, touch, is the mind. So even that we tuck away inside our shell. And this way we can be safe from that jackal. The Buddha says, who knows what will happen if you allow for that jackal to get hold of you, then you're not going to find any peace. You're not going to find any stillness. It's only going to be trouble. And so in the same way, when we practice coming here on retreat, we tuck ourselves inside our shell. When we practice meditation on the cushion, tuck ourselves inside the shell. And so in this way, we can understand 3 things. We can understand, okay, there is some enjoyment to sensory pleasures. Fine. We can understand there's some drawbacks to sensory pleasures. And we can understand there's an escape from sensory pleasures. And that escape is meditation, because it's the desire for sensory pleasures, for sensory experience, even just experiencing these senses. This is something that will obstruct deep meditation. If we want to have deep meditation, very deep meditation, then we can't get involved in the world of the senses. It leads away from very deep meditation. And so this is something that we start to see as we practice more and more. Where does happiness lie? What does it mean to allow yourself a few days away from all of those things that you usually do, to turn inward? When we do this, we start to see more and more clearly where true happiness lies. This is what I hope we'll be able to glimpse a little bit of over the next few days as we train our monkey mind.